That's not a glitch, Dad. Someone's hijacking the system. Avery Dawson's voice was too steady for a 12-year-old girl gripping a mop and staring at a blinking red monitor in the dim hallway of Cornova Technologies. Her father, Thomas Dawson, was kneeling nearby, scrubbing an old coffee spill from the polished tiles. He paused at her words, let out a low grunt, but didn't look up. You're seeing things again, Avery. It's probably just a routine update screen. But Avery didn't blink. Her gaze stayed locked on the small display panel mounted just above the network access bay. First came static, then a black screen, then lines of red code scrolling faster than her eyes could track. They shouldn't be there. Not here. Not now. It was 5:48 a.m., and the tech facility, responsible for developing high-security government software, was supposed to be dormant at this hour. But one of the west entrances had been left unlocked for maintenance. Thomas figured it was harmless to bring his daughter along. Avery never wandered far. She was quiet, sharp, and more fascinated by machine logic than by cartoons. Her mop clattered to the floor. She stepped toward the access terminal, her brows tightening. This isn't a simple screen error, she murmured. Someone's tunneling into their archival drives. Thomas rose slowly, wiping his damp hands on his coveralls. Hold on now. We don't mess with stuff that ain't ours. You hear me? I didn't touch anything, Avery said firmly. But if nobody stops it, the core admin system will start spreading corrupted code across client links. That could cost them millions. Her tone was flat, not afraid, not speculating, just stating a fact. 3 floors above, the CEO of Cornova, Dana Keller, was walking briskly to her office, a steaming chai latte in one hand and her phone in the other. Her day usually began before the sunrise finished stretching across the skyline. But today, her executive dashboard wouldn't load, and her fingerprint scanner buzzed red. By 6:01, her director of systems rang from the lower level, voice-tight with panic. We're registering several internal breaches. Multiple nodes unresponsive. Some are resisting shutdown. Dana stopped in her tracks. Scope of damage? If we can't isolate the signal in the next 15 minutes, we might lose Project Atlas and the entire defense mirror node. Dana's cup dropped from her hand, shattering across the tile floor. Back in the server wing, Thomas had crouched next to Avery, peering at the terminal. He didn't grasp all the code, but he recognized the panic it triggered. Years of quietly listening to his daughter babble about code branches and signal loops had taught him when something was very, very wrong. You're sure about this? Avery nodded. The code is too clean. It's recursive, concealed. It mirrors system health checks. That's how it's hiding. But it doesn't belong here. Someone slipped it in, and they knew exactly what they were doing. A shrill alarm wailed. Avery didn't flinch. Thomas stepped instinctively in front of her. 2 IT staff burst into corridor seconds later, pale-faced and wide-eyed. One of them froze when he saw the girl pointing at the access terminal. What are you two doing here? Cleaning, Thomas said, lifting his ID. Check last night's parody logs. Avery cut in, pointing. Around 2:07 a.m. That's when the tunneling started. It's disguised, so you'll need to reverse trace it using node route F4. The older technician blinked. How the hell do you know that? Avery shrugged. I read fast. The younger tech leaned toward the screen, then back at Avery. She's right. The pattern, she caught it. The older tech was already pulling a secure tablet from his belt. Get this to Ms. Keller. Now! By 6:15, Dana Keller stood in the lower-level control hub, surrounded by a huddle of engineers. Avery and Thomas remained off to the side, Avery still holding her mop bucket, like it was armor. Dana eyed the girl, then the scrolling threat data. Who is she? My daughter, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get her out of here. But just as security moved to escort Avery away, the lead engineer raised a hand. Ma'am. She identified the breach before we even picked it up. If we map her trace, we might still locate the source before the backup protocols start replicating across the net. Dana stared at the girl. She didn't look like much. Torn hoodie, scuffed shoes, but her eyes burned with focused fire. You have 60 seconds, Dana said. Tell me what you saw. Avery walked forward, face calm. She pointed to the terminal. You're trying to stop the breach from spreading, she said. But that wasn't the entry point. They got in yesterday, before your scans updated. They use a fake system patch file. But I can trace it. How? Avery pulled out a napkin from her hoodie pocket, covered in graphite scrawls. I made a map. Dana looked at the napkin, then at the girl. Draw it again, on the glass. Now. Avery hesitated. Can my dad stay? Dana nodded. Yes. Avery approached the glass wall, sleeves still damp, and began to sketch. The room fell still. Her fingers moved with clarity. Line by line, she mapped a reverse tunnel protocol unlike anything they had seen before. Someone behind her whispered, "She's building a bounce trace." Avery stepped back. Here, that's the loop that's duplicating. Looks like a sync backup, but it's bouncing off a forged node signal. You've been feeding it admin credentials every 10 minutes. Dana crossed her arms. So, how do we kill it? Avery glanced at Thomas, who gave a small, encouraging nod. You'll have to sever every local mirror link. But that won't work unless you reboot the root admin node from core. Dana frowned. The physical backup? In San Diego? That node's in cold storage. Avery nodded. Exactly. That's why it's clean. The tech lead swallowed. That's not online. It's completely isolated, which is why it's safe, Avery said. Dana turned to her engineers. Can we remote access it? Only with elevated shell privileges. We'd need a manual override. Then do it. Now. As the room exploded into action, Thomas crouched beside his daughter again. How'd you even know all that? You've never touched their systems. Last year you let me read the old user guides while you waxed their printer room. I remember the port names. And I saw some of the diagnostics when we walked past yesterday. I just put together. Thomas exhaled slowly. You always did see what others miss. Upstairs, Dana walked briskly through the executive halls, Avery's napkin still in hand. $1 million company nearly compromised, saved by a janitor's daughter. Find out everything about that girl, she told her assistant. Quietly. No media. Back in the control room, Avery sat off to the side eating a granola bar while engineers rebuilt protocols based on her sketch. I'm probably getting fired, Thomas muttered. No, you're not, Avery replied. You didn't break anything. A technician rushed in. We need her upstairs. Thomas stood quickly. She's a kid. She's the only one who understands this trace path well enough to guide us through it. If we lose the window, the sync will push the breach again. Dana arrived moments later, voice steady but sharp. Mr. Dawson, I give you my word, she'll be safe. And if she pulls this off, she'll be much more than just your daughter. Thomas looked at Avery. She nodded. The top floor of Cornova's tower had transformed into a war room. Glass walls gleamed under recessed lights, but all attention was locked on the dim central screen, where red alerts pulsed like a synthetic heartbeat. Dana Keller stood with arms folded, her jaw taut. Technicians typed furiously. Command windows blinked open and shut in a cascade of encrypted chaos. Avery Dawson was led to a secure terminal at the end of the operations table. The keyboard looked oversized under her small hands, but her expression was unreadable, calm, focused, like the code was a language only she could hear whispering. 3 senior engineers stood behind her, trading skeptical glances. Just observe, Dana told them. She doesn't need help. Avery cracked her knuckles, took a breath, and started typing. She moved to the root directories like a surgeon, eyes flicking rapidly across screens. She bypassed firewalls, skipped redundant logs, and began scanning the administrative shell layer by layer. She's not even hesitating. One engineer murmured, "Wait, look." Another pointed, "She's slicing through the sandbox trail." That's where the spoof diagnostics were hiding. A minute ticked by, then 2. Legacy shell accessed. The system chirped. Avery leaned in. They use a legacy ping mask to bypass initial detection. It mimics internal system checks, so your firewall thinks it's routine. But it's not. It's pulling admin tokens from local echoes. Explain that, Dana said from across the room. Avery spun slightly in her chair. It's like an echo chamber. Every time a credential pings for validation, this thing grabs a return pulse and mirrors it. Not all at once, just enough to blend in. One of the engineers leaned forward. So it's skimming trust without tripping alarms. Avery nodded. Exactly. Can we cut it? We can, she said, but only if we shut down all local mirrors now. Do it, Dana said. Avery typed one final command. The red alerts disappeared from one screen, then another, and then green. Silence dropped like a weight across the room. Status? Dana asked. An engineer confirmed. The breach has been isolated. Replication chains severed. Cheers erupted softly from the tech crew, but Avery just exhaled and turned to her father, who stood nearby like a silent sentry. Can we go home now? She asked, almost whispering. Before Thomas could answer, Dana crossed the room with swift, deliberate steps. You just prevented a multi-million-dollar disaster, she said, her tone measured but warm. I don't think I've ever seen anyone, let alone a kid, do what you just did. Avery looked down. I didn't mean to. I just didn't want the screen to lie. Dana blinked. There was no false modesty in the girl's voice, just quiet truth. She turned to her head of engineering. Is her model trace usable? The engineer nodded. It's more than usable. It's intuitive, elegant. She found a logic loop we missed 3 audits ago. Dana looked back at Avery. Would you like to come back tomorrow? She asked. Avery tilted her head. Not to clean. Dana smiled. No, to learn. We could use a mind like yours. Avery's eyes darted to her father. Can my dad come too? Dana turned to Thomas. Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to offer him a new title. Senior Facilities Supervisor. Thomas's eyes widened. That's not necessary. Dana's voice softened. It is. You raise someone who sees the invisible. That doesn't happen by accident. Avery reached out and squeezed her father's hand. Outside, the morning sun was rising over the skyline. The world had not yet seen what had just happened inside those glass walls, but it would. And when it did, it wouldn't just be Avery's name they remembered. It would be the quiet moment when a janitor's daughter rewrote the ending. The following morning, Buzz lingered in the halls of Cornova like static on a wire. The break room on level 4 had never been so quiet. Engineers whispered. Interns stared at their screens, replaying server logs, trying to make sense of how a 12-year-old had spotted something they hadn't. In the facilities wing, Thomas Dawson adjusted the patch on his new uniform. It was crisp, freshly embroidered. Supervisor. He glanced across the room where Avery sipped chocolate milk at a staff table, nervously picking at the corner of a napkin. I'm not used to people looking at me like that, she mumbled. Thomas chuckled gently. They're not just looking at you, kiddo. They're seeing you. That's different. A moment later, Dana Keller walked in. She wore a clean slate gray blazer, her expression softer than usual. She approached slowly, hands unclasped. Morning, Avery. Hi, Avery replied, cautious. Dana crouched slightly, eye level now. I wanted to thank you again, not just for what you did yesterday, but how you kept your head when the rest of us were spiraling. Avery shrugged. Loud yelling scrambles my thoughts, so I focus harder. Helps block it out. Dana paused. The honesty hit harder than she expected. That focus saved us millions, she said at last. The board wants to meet you. Thomas tensed nearby. She's not a prop, he said. Of course not, Dana nodded. But she deserves to be recognized beyond hallway whispers. Later that afternoon, inside the 12th floor executive boardroom, Avery sat at the far end of a glass table. Her feet didn't reach the floor. Dana stood beside her, introducing her to the board. She's not a hacker, Dana clarified. She's a pattern reader. She didn't just stumble into this. She saw what we missed. One of the board members leaned forward. How old are you? 12. Avery said. 13 next March. Did someone teach you this? No, she replied. I just watched and read. Then I asked questions until things made sense. If they didn't make sense, I followed them until they did. A beat of silence passed. The chairman cleared his throat. That's more initiative than half our cybersecurity division. A few chuckled. Some didn't. Dana raised her hand. I'm proposing we establish a mentorship program. Quiet, internal. She'll work part-time with the cybersecurity unit, under supervision. No media, just opportunity. She glanced at Avery. And we'll compensate the family accordingly. Avery looked at Thomas. He gave her a small nod. Okay, Avery said, but I don't want to wear anything with shoulder pads. Laughter rippled across the room. The vote passed unanimously that night as they rode the city bus home. Avery sat beside her father, watching lights blur past the windows. Do you think they really mean it? She asked. Thomas thought about it. I think they saw something they didn't expect, and now they're scrambling to catch up. Avery pulled her legs up onto the seat, knees to chest. I don't want to change, she said quietly. I just want to understand. Like, why smart people build dumb systems? Thomas smiled faintly. That's your strength, Avenue. You don't just see pieces. You see the puzzle. At home, Avery pulled out her old sketchbook and began drafting a new system map. Not for the company, but for herself. A kind of blueprint for how her world connected. Dad, school, silence, machines, the hallway, the glass boardroom. She didn't know it yet, but that sketch would one day shape Cornova's next decade of training protocols. And the next morning, when Avery Dawson entered the front lobby for the first time with a new badge clipped to her hoodie, Junior Systems Advisor, provisional, the world shifted again, because now the building didn't just see her, it expected her. Avery Dawson's new desk was modest. It sat tucked between two server rooms on Cornova's cybersecurity floor, a clean white table with a single monitor, a rolling chair, a small whiteboard, and a neatly arranged basket of snacks someone had labeled for Avery only. She placed her backpack on the floor and ran her fingers across the keyboard, pausing before tapping the first key. No alarms, no breach, just silence and possibility. Dana Keller passed by with a nod, but didn't stop. She knew better than to hover. Avery wasn't the kind you nudged into work. You just made space, and she filled it. At the far end of the room, Thomas Dawson mopped quietly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he watched his daughter take her first official breath in this strange new world. Avery opened her notebook and began drawing. Her lines were clean, direct, nodes, bridges, checksums. It wasn't a diagram for the current crisis. It was something else entirely, an optimization loop to reduce latency across multi-layered access trees. She hadn't been asked to do it. She just wanted to. Half an hour later, a shadow passed over her shoulder. That's not the standard model. A deep voice said. Avery turned. A tall man stood behind her, arms crossed. His skin was dark, his expression unreadable. A linebacker's build dressed in slacks and a utility pullover. He looked like someone who could walk through a fire and not notice. His name badge read, Julian Red, Cyber Defense Officer. I didn't learn it, Avery said, lifting a new marker. I noticed the system doesn't handle overlapping log calls well under certain nested conditions, so I mapped a cleaner route. Julian raised a brow. He crossed the room and tapped something into his tablet. After a few moments, he froze. You're right, he muttered. We've been getting irregular latency spikes, exactly where this loop would stabilize it. Before he could say more, Dana stepped into the room. Problem or solution? She asked. Julian didn't look up. Both. He turned to Avery. You free Thursday morning? I guess, she replied. You're sitting in on the threat strategy meeting. Just listen. Do I have to talk? No, Dana said with a smile. But we might ask you to draw. Thursday came fast. Avery sat in the back corner of the conference room, a spiral notebook balanced on her lap. Around her, senior analyst in security leads debated threat matrices and behavioral attack vectors. Multiple monitors line the walls, displaying global breach reports, threat probability graphs, and overlapping data clusters from the past 6 weeks. Everett shook his head. She's the one who saw the trail. I just followed it. That night, Avery sat on her bedroom floor, sketchbook open. But instead of code, she was drawing people, circles connected by arrows. Dana, Julian, Everett, her dad. She was mapping something new. Trust. The hum of the server room echoed like a heartbeat. Everett Kane stood motionless in the main access corridor 3 levels beneath Core Nova's executive offices. His arms were crossed. His eyes were narrowed, fixed on rows of black steel racks that blinked with soft LED light. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Avery Dawson stood a few feet behind him, holding her notepad. She had sketched the data relay systems that morning before breakfast, trying to spot irregularities. When Everett's tone shifted, she looked up immediately. "Did we miss something in the logs?" she asked. "No," Everett said slowly. "They're too clean." Avery's brow furrowed. "Too clean?" "Yeah." Everett's voice was low, as if the walls might be listening. "Anyone smart enough to set up sleeper nodes wouldn't leave half the ports exposed unless they wanted us to find them." "You think this was bait?" she asked. "I think we walked into a test," he replied. They entered the room. It was colder than usual, the kind of cold that wasn't just about temperature, but intention. The silence in the space felt engineered. Seconds later, Julian Red arrived with Dana Keller right behind him. "We cut access to the known bad nodes and reset the secondary protocols," Julian said. "But I agree, something doesn't add up." Avery was already on the floor, crouched beside the lower server racks. Her eyes scanned the paneling, then paused at something tiny, barely the size of coin, near the base of the frame. "This port wasn't here last week," she murmured. Dana knelt beside her. "You're sure?" "I help clean this room with my dad every Saturday," Avery said. "He lets me polish the baseboards. That wasn't here before. It's new. Too new." Julian crouched to inspect it. "This isn't in our inventory," he said, his voice tight. "Can you pull it?" Everett asked. Julian nodded and reached for a secure tools case. With surgical care, he detached the embedded module. It looked harmless, thumb-sized, metallic, but it hummed faintly with its own micro-cooling system and emitted a low, pulsing signal. Everett studied it. "This isn't just a backdoor. It's a smart relay. Adaptive. It listens, learns, and mimics internal traffic to blend in." Avery stepped closer. "Like a voice mimic, but for data," she said. Everett gave her a sharp nod. "Exactly." Dana's phone buzzed. She answered it. Her voice clipped. "Keller." A pause. Her expression darkened. She switched to speakerphone. It was Angela Voss, head of financial security. "We just triggered a false approval alert," Angela said. "Someone tried to reroute high-level transfer credentials through a Ghost executive account." Everett's face went hard. "It's starting. Freeze all outbound approvals now," Dana commanded. Angela replied, "Already done. But if these relays are in other departments..." "They are," Everett said flatly. "This relay isn't for one-time use. It's part of a hive." He looked at the team. "And we need to find a queen." The building shifted into high alert. Everyone was instructed to stay off internal networks unless approved. A full sweep of every server room and backup facility was launched. Communications were moved to air-gapped devices. Avery was relocated to the executive boardroom, which had been converted into a secondary operations command post. Multiple monitors displayed live feeds of code traffic. Engineers and analysts buzzed around her. Still, she sat still, watching. Everett brought her a warm cup of cocoa and a protein bar. "What are you seeing?" he asked. Avery pointed to a repeating process in the log stream. "This string," she said, highlighting it. "It looks harmless. A time-stamped echo, but it always lags exactly 12 seconds behind the rest." Everett leaned in. "So it's not responding with the system. It's reacting." She nodded, like it's watching the system, not part of it. Julian joined them. "That would mean it's syncing with an external clock." Dana arrived just in time to hear that. "Which means," she said, "we're not dealing with legacy malware. We have an active signal, a live controller." Avery's fingers flew across her keyboard. Her breathing was steady, but her shoulders tensed. This was an old trap. It was a conversation. A live one. Suddenly, one of the monitors flashed red. Julian swore under his breath. "The finance servers are attempting to reauthorize wire transfers," he said. Angela didn't request it. Angela's voice buzzed through the intercom. "That command just came through from my login." Everett snapped to his feet. "Trace it." Avery was already working. "I'm on it," she said, hands flying. "It's bouncing between ghost nodes, copying email patterns, even simulating typing behavior, but what?" Dana asked. "There," Avery said, jabbing the screen. "That delay. Same 12-second lag. Same signature." Everett leaned over. "Where's it coming from?" Avery narrowed her eyes. "Subserver pod 4B, she said. "That's where you store offline backups." Julian's face went pale. "No one should be accessing that. It's underground." "Then that's where we go," Everett said. Julian grabbed his badge. "No," Everett said, cutting him off. "We all go. Now." 3 levels below, the stairwell walls glistened with condensation. Pipes rattled softly above their heads as the team raced toward Pod 4B. Julian swiped his badge. "Nothing. Door's been rerouted," he said. "It's running on external authorization," Avery added. She pulled a small flash drive from her hoodie pocket. "I saved a mirror of the firewall timestamps earlier. If I spoof the right one." She inserted the drive and began typing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, green light. The door hissed open. Inside was cold, humming with a different kind of quiet. Rows of old backup servers lined the walls. In the far corner, a console flickered. Lines of code ran across the screen, massive data pools. Not just wire commands. Entire behavioral profiles. Staff credentials. Access logs. "They're not stealing money," Dana said. "They're cloning us." Everett stepped closer. This was never about damage. It was about duplication. Once the profiles were complete, they'd phase us out, remotely run the company from the outside. Avery whispered. "That's why the system didn't break. It shifted." Julian stared in horror. "They almost replaced us, and we wouldn't have even noticed." They began isolating the terminal. Everett took a drive from his jacket and copied every file manually. No network, no risk. As they left, Dana spoke to Avery quietly. "You saved us again, but we need to know who helped set this up." "Someone on the inside," Julian said. "They had to know this space. And when no one would be looking." Avery clutched her sketchbook tighter. In her mind, the puzzle was forming again. But this time it wasn't code. It was people. The next morning, Cornova felt different. Not quieter in the comforting sense, but quieter in the heavy, looming way that settles over a place after a storm, when everyone is too afraid to ask if another one is coming. Avery Dawson sat alone in the staff break room, hands wrapped around a cup of cocoa that had long since gone cold. Outside the window, dawn painted the skyline in peach and steel blue. Her father, Thomas, had just finished waxing the reception hall floor. He passed by the doorway, paused when he saw her, and stepped inside. "You didn't sleep much," he said softly. "Neither did you," she replied, offering a faint smile. He poured himself a coffee from the ancient percolator and sat beside her. "You saved something big last night." "I was part of a team," she said, though her voice held uncertainty. She didn't know how to feel. Pride felt too loud. Fear felt too late. Mostly, she was just tired. Before he could respond, the door opened. Dana Keller, Julian Red, and Everett Kane entered in near unison. Their expressions were serious, and not in the corporate way. In the kind of way people wore when something personal had been broken. "We need to talk," Dana said gently. Avery stood, brushing crumbs from her sleeve. They led her to a secured conference room, lights dimmed and windows polarized. On the screen at the front of the room was a frozen frame from Pod 4B, captured by a silent security feed. Grainy, low light. Timestamp barely 4 minutes before their team had arrived the night before. A man stood near the active terminal, not facing the camera, but partially turned. Avery leaned in. "That's not a stranger," she whispered. Everett tapped a key, zooming in on the man's waist. There was an ID badge clipped to his belt, clear as day. Julian's voice was quiet but sharp. "That's Owen Trent, Director of Internal Systems." A long silence settled. Trent had worked at Cornova for over 20 years. He'd been in charge of security protocols, backup infrastructure, and even helped write the company's original data integrity charter. He mentored junior staff, hosted holiday parties. He was a guy everyone trusted. He embedded the smart relays, Julian said. He had access, knew how to hide them, and knew exactly when no one would be looking, Everett added. Dana's expression was unreadable. "We need to notify legal." Avery's voice broke in. Why would someone like him risk everything? Everett answered, low and grim, because someone offered him more than everything. That afternoon, they briefed Cornova's CEO, Leonard McMillan. The tall, silver-haired executive sat behind his desk, fingers steepled. He looked exhausted and older than he had 3 days ago. "He's been selling us out?" McMillan asked, pacing slowly. "Selling what, access?" "Not just access," Dana said. "Behavioral patterns, login routines, voice samples. He was building digital identities. Our staff, our board members." Julian added, "We traced one relay back to a shell corporation based in Tallinn. Likely just a front. We also found links to a crypto laundering loop routed through a defunct Swiss exchange." McMillan exhaled hard and turned to Avery. "And you? How old are you again?" 13, she said, sitting on the edge of a wide office chair. "You saw what seasoned professionals miss." She hesitated. "I just pay attention." He nodded slowly. "Your dad's been with us nearly 10 years. Never late, never loud, never once asked for anything." Avery looked at her hands, unsure how to respond. McMillan knelt, so he was eye level with her. "We're going to need your help again. I know you didn't ask for this, but we're in a place now where quiet minds matter more than loud titles." Avery nodded slowly. "Okay." That evening, Avery sat back in the boardroom turned operations center. Julian approached with a small flash drive. "This is your backup of the backup," he said. "Encrypted, triple redundant, just in case." She took it but hesitated. "Do you think Trent will come back?" "If he's smart, no. But the ones who think they're smarter than everyone, they always leave a trail." She nodded. "What if we already missed it?" Julian smiled faintly. "Then we'll find it. You and me." That night, Avery walked beside her father through the now familiar halls of Cornova. The cleaning crews and overnight techs nodded to them in a new way. Respectful, grateful, curious. At the elevator, Thomas looked down at her. "You okay?" "I think so," she said. He took a breath. "You know, your mom used to say silence has its own rhythm, that it tells you more than noise if you listen." Avery smiled. "You think she'd be proud?" "I know she would." As they stepped into the elevator, Avery allowed herself, for the first time since the breach, to feel still. But the stillness didn't last long. Early Saturday morning, before sunrise, Avery was back at her desk. Dana had added her to the building's emergency access list by hand. Nobody questioned it. The cybersecurity floor was nearly empty. Backup generators hummed quietly in the distance. Everett and Julian were already there. One board member leaned forward, older, silver-bearded. "I want to know something," he said. "How did a child, no offense, see what we didn't?" Avery sat straight, her voice steady. "Because I wasn't looking at the walls," she said. "I was watching the floor." The room was silent. She continued. "People hide malware like wolves. Obvious. Fangs. Loud. This was a ghost. It didn't bite. It echoed." Thomas, standing in the back of the room in his newly minted supervisor uniform, spoke up softly. "She sees what people don't say. That's her gift." Dana gave a nod. "And it's the reason Cornova still stands." That evening, Avery slipped away from the bustle of the recovery process and walked alone to the rooftop garden of the building. The air was crisp, quiet. The hum of city life below was distant, muffled like breathing through glass. She sat by a stone planter, notebook in her lap, knees pulled close. Dana appeared moments later. She didn't speak at first, just removed her shoes and walked barefoot across the cool tiles, joining Avery near the edge. "I didn't mean for any of this," Avery said. "I know," Dana replied, "but sometimes the moment doesn't care if you're ready." Avery looked down. "I'm just a kid." Dana smiled faintly. "No, you're the one who listened when no one else did." They watched the lights of the city blink, like a distant data stream. And in that silence, Avery began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't just about saving something broken. Maybe it was about building something better. It wasn't on the front page. There was no press release, no headlines, no streaming clip on corporate news feeds. But that Tuesday afternoon, in the heart of Cornova's grand atrium, a quiet ceremony unfolded. A podium had been rolled beneath the main skylight. 2 flagpoles flanked it, one bearing the company's insignia, the other the state seal. Rows of chairs lined up in neat, minimalist precision. No fanfare, no stage lights. But the room was full. Executives, engineers, and support staff gathered shoulder to shoulder. A few city officials lingered near the back. One local news crew stood by, quietly recording. And at the center of it all, dressed in a simple navy dress and her usual black sneakers, stood Avery Dawson. Her father stood behind her, arms gently crossed, expression a blend of pride and disbelief. Dana Keller stepped up to the podium. She wore her usual tailored blazer, but something in her voice was softer than the lines of her suit. "There are moments when a company is tested," she began, "not by stock performance or product launch, but by the people who rise when no one expects them to." She paused. "And sometimes those people aren't the ones with titles, or degrees, or corner offices." Avery shifted slightly, eyes down. "They're the quiet ones in the hallway, the observers, the thinkers, the ones who ask a single question no one else considered, and in doing so, change the trajectory of everything." Dana's gaze lifted to the crowd. "We owe a great deal to Avery Dawson for noticing what others missed, for listening when the system spoke in whispers, and for reminding us that courage doesn't always come wrapped in credentials." A ripple of applause moved through the room. Avery stepped forward. She held a folded paper in one hand, creased and smudged from her pocket. She unfolded it slowly and spoke into the microphone. "My mom used to say, the world doesn't ask if you're ready. It just throws the moment at you and waits." A hush fell again. That's what this felt like. I didn't try to be a hero. I just saw something that didn't feel right, and I asked why. She looked up then. Her eyes met faces, some familiar, some not, but for the first time, she didn't feel small. I guess sometimes asking is enough. When she stepped back, the applause swelled, louder now, sustained not because of formality, but because of something real. In that moment, the building didn't just see her, it stood with her. That evening, Avery and her father sat on the balcony of their apartment, overlooking the low-rise buildings and scattered neon signs of downtown. If you've seen something others haven't, say something, even if your voice shakes, even if they don't listen the first time. Tag someone who has a mind like Avery's, the silent solver, the one who always notices patterns. Celebrate them. Tell them they matter, because they do. Avery didn't save a company because she was trained to. She saved it because she cared enough to ask, why is that red light blinking? So maybe the next time you feel like your voice doesn't matter, remember, you don't have to be loud to be right. You don't have to be seen to see clearly. And you don't need permission to start noticing what others miss. You just need to pay attention and be brave enough to say something when it counts. The world doesn't just need more voices. It needs more listeners who are ready to act. Are you one of them? If this story moved you, don't just scroll. Like, share, and comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and who your Maya is. Maybe there's a quiet mind around you right now, seeing what no one else can. Because sometimes the world doesn't need another loud voice. It needs someone who listens,